This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook. Chapter 33, Suicide Cart. Go-karts became all the rage and garnered lots of front-page news in the 1960s. So did death and severe injury due to their colliding with cars. Even worse than motorcycles, a go-kart's 2-foot vertical profile made them almost impossible to see, and thus they were frequently run over. Slamming underneath a moving car or truck in one is a horrific way to expire. So my dad decided to build one for the family. It was large, long, and wide, made of very sturdy 2x6s, bolted securely at the corners. Rather than a sleek, light, tubular machine, his looked like Pinocchio cobbled it together from trees felled in the Black Forest. It weighed a ton. At some point, midway through the project, I suspect my mother, reading yet another tragic newspaper account of a young lad severely injured or worse, while zooming out of his driveway in his go-kart, scuttled the project completely. The large, half-finished cart was leaned up against my dad's shop wall and abandoned with no explanation. There it remained for months until late one Saturday afternoon. With the monotony and heat of yet another 90-degree summer day bearing down, Lobster and I had a brainstorm. Let's finish the go-kart. A real go-kart had an engine. It had power and a drivetrain. It also had steering and brakes to stop. It had a seat. Since ours had been abandoned early in the development phase, it had none of these things. It was a frame, wheels, and tires. It wasn't really a go-kart at all. It was just a platform with wheels. With boredom, a workshop, and creativity running high, Lobster and I got to work. First, the seat. A lawn chair was a seat. Living in South Florida, we certainly had a plentiful supply of lawn chairs. The reclining position might make control more difficult, but a pillow or two could solve that in a hurry. Aluminum lawn chairs were feather light, a good thing for balance and proper weight distribution, we concluded. They were also flimsy, and this was not a good thing. We'd make do, as that was the only reasonable option available. Next came the propulsion. We were immediately discouraged because we had no engine. The obvious choice was a lawnmower. The big red Toro had a vertical drive shaft, so we couldn't even begin to imagine how to convert this to our application. The Toro never started anyway. Our smaller push-mower starting cord was broken. We also lacked sprockets and chains or any of the other components to create a functional drivetrain. Finally, we'd be grounded immediately when it was discovered that either of Dad's lawnmowers had been salvaged to complete the go-kart that my mother had clearly mothballed. We were at an impasse and, as I recall, gave up on the idea for the day. We jumped on our bikes and headed out for Rock Lake. A couple of weeks later, a few of my crew and I were milling around the garage, bored and hot, drinking warm Coca-Colas. As we considered the go-kart up against the shop wall, we again started to theorize about how to get this machine on the road. Eureka! How could we have been so lame? Forget pushing it with an engine we didn't have. We'd just pull it with a vehicle that already had propulsion. Between my brothers and the crew, we could source several bicycles, 3 mini bikes, a motorcycle, and 2 strange French motorized bicycles made by Solex. Where does one secure a French motorized bicycle in Miami in the mid-60s? Probably at the same dealer who was selling British bikes. Somehow, we had 2 of the strange machines. We would start with 2 bikes, pulling the go-kart just as 2 oxen pull a plow, only much faster. Power source resolved, our collective imaginations focused next on how to steer the beast and then how to stop it. We had no conventional way of guiding it, so we went nautical, for a simple reason. We understood water, wind, currents, shoals, tides, and oars. Not that we rowed much. We had seen and used oars occasionally, but only in trying to navigate the bay and mostly getting off of it. While gravel-embedded asphalt was not water, we believed the same general principles would apply, so we added steering oars to our go-kart, screwing one to each side. Some of the crew put forth that the beast would never negotiate a turn and would therefore be largely without any reasonable guidance. After debating at length, we concluded that this was a reckless enterprise with the possibility of serious carnage. We proceeded with the plan. With much uncertainty clouding the operation, we decided first to use the bike propulsion system. We lashed two Stingrays, mine and Dinkle's, with Dacron sheet lines to the front beam of the go-kart and began to pull the contraption out of our driveway and up the road. Lobster was seated in the lawn chair at the helm, El Capitan. It wouldn't turn, so we just dragged the front into the correct trajectory, aimed directly up the street. The thing was heavy, so the early going was a chore. Our street had a slight rise midway along its length. The first 100 yards, exiting right from our driveway, had us straining and dripping with sweat. We wore shorts, t-shirts, and bare feet. As we rolled down the road, we were quickly reminded of the go-kart's mass. Like all of the vehicles my dad built, it was superbly crafted and made to endure. As we rumbled along on our first test run, Lobster shouted orders to Dinkle and me. We noted our speed was pronounced, our momentum extreme, and control lacking. Engaging the steering oars should have had a notable effect, enabling the jumbo go-kart to weight its rear wheel while lifting or at least lightening the opposite front wheel. The plan was to pivot or pull the go-kart through the turn with our bikes and the oars. Luckily, the corner had a berm worn slightly into the outside, so we were comforted in knowing that if the turning mechanism was not quite tuned in, the berm could do the rest, grasping the front wheels and smoothly pushing the cart into the 90-degree turn. Down the street we went. In all, the result was unremarkable and not as planned. The go-kart drove straight ahead at full speed and ignored the berm completely, as our steering method provided no response whatsoever. Dinkle and I had taken sharp left turns, also to no effect. The tow ropes, which flapped and snapped as the bloated buggy was pulled straight down the street, suddenly tightened with a loud crack. Before we could even begin to dive for safety, our tow bikes whipsawed into reverse and lifted briefly into the air before launching us backward right on top of the crashed cart in Ted Williams' front yard. Unfortunately, Lobster's lawn chair had broken free and he was tangled in a jumble of twisted aluminum and plastic fabric beneath the vehicle. We regrouped and checked for severe injuries. There were none, only a few scrapes and a missing toenail or two, but no bone fractures. Safety first. It was agreed that it was time to pick up the pieces and get back to work. Lobster had appointed himself as Chief of Vehicle Design and Engineering. He was older, taller, and clearly a larger risk-taker. He was the one who would call in the bomb scare or jump off a 40-foot bridge not knowing boat traffic or the depth and contents of the water below. He'd be the first to run from the police in a pinch or address an adult in such an outrageous manner that both the adult and my parents would soon address the event again and again in the months to follow. The crew acknowledged that these were acceptable qualities for the position of chief in command, and Lobster took the lead in getting our sorry go-kart back on the road. Back at Dad's shop, with much feedback and detailed analysis from a large group of adolescents, Lobster viewed the wreckage, processed all input, grew very silent for an uncomfortable length of time, and then abruptly concluded that the problem was quite obvious. We needed a good deal more speed. Without speed, he lectured, the go-kart would not be able to execute the turn enabled by the oar steering system. This sounded somewhat suspect, but we agreed to consider his improvements and get some serious horsepower into the propulsion plan. The Kawasaki motorcycle was immediately eliminated as an option due to its sheer power and speed. It was my oldest brother, Dink,